in Twinmotion. Okay, so that process really begins for us, academically speaking, in a program called Cadmapper. So I'm just going to drag that over. Oh, I should probably be sharing my screen first, huh? Yeah, let's take 2 steps back, Dave. Don't get ahead of yourself. Glad this is part of the recording as well. Share screen, screen 1. Share, okay. Now let's look at Cadmapper. Hoping everybody has Cadmapper on their screens. If I could get like a thumbs up from somebody or something like that. Because right now everybody's on mute and I've got everybody's images.
I can see it myself.
Perfect, thank you, Tom. Okay, so yeah, and again, I'll remind you guys, I'm on a cellular internet connection. So if something does go weird or we get kind of a big freeze or something like that, let me know, okay? And I will take a few steps back with everything and try and get everybody back up to speed. Okay, so this is a website called Cadmapper. It's just cadmapper.com. It's basically, it's a setup really more for urban planners than it is for architects. And I'm making that estimation really because it's free unless we go over a certain size. So I'm going to continue to work with Thorn Crown as a site. So if like I zoom over this way, you're going to start to see, you know, more of the city. Following the highway along, I've got the little side road that goes right up to Thorn Crown, which is right at the end of this. So what Cadmapper does is it's going to capture roads, it's going to capture topography, all of those things at a reasonably high resolution and bring them into Revit for me. Okay, so the process is pretty simple. I'm just going to click Create File. And if you'll notice, you know, I should go back one step. It is free unless you're over a certain size. The product that's created, just go back one step right here. If I size this over a kilometer, it goes into a cost, right? So for most things for architecture, you know, we're not capturing over a kilometer squared. So as long as you are under 1 kilometer, this is completely free, which is very cool. So let's get this file and I will download it and then we will import that into Revit and we can see a little bit of what you're working with there. This will create a DXF file. So I'm just going to hit the download button here. And these are usually fairly small files, so it shouldn't take but a second to download. So this DXF file is a little bit tricky to work with in Revit because, like all things when we're transporting back and forth between different softwares, of course it's not at the right scale, but we'll walk through that process here as well. So should have Revit up on screen now. Again, if it's not, somebody let me know. But I'm just going to do a insert from Revit and I'm going to import a CAD file. All of this stuff is right here on my desktop. And so this is, I'm going to extract, this is what I just downloaded, the Cadmapper Eureka Springs. Oh, and I need to change my import file type to DXF. Well, let's see here. Looks like I need to extract it first. Let's go at this a slightly different way. Desktop, TechTalks, Cadmapper, there we go. There's my DXF file. So I'm just going to copy that and get it out of that folder. Oh, looks like it's already in there. So we'll just run the replace. Okay, so let's go to Tech Talks. There's my file, Cadmapper Eureka Springs.dxf. And I'm just going to say, okay. And this is going to place it. It's going to be about the size relative to my site of a postage stamp, which is kind of unfortunate. So I know right away scale's not right. I did some digging, and honestly, this was like 2 years ago that I did the digging on this to learn the scale factor. And I don't remember exactly why we determined the scale factor is 1,000, that we have to scale it up by, but the scale factor is 1,000. So the first thing that I have to do in Revit is unpin it so that I can edit the file. I'm going to click the scale. I'm going to do a numerical scale factor of 1000, not 001, but 1000, and just scale it about the center of it. And then so let's zoom way out, right? So that's about the area that I grabbed. And you can see, yes, that is Eureka Springs topography right there. We are on the right track. It gives you an idea, it gives you a center line for roads. A process that I walk through with our students when I have a little bit of additional time is how to bring in some higher resolution Google Earth files and things like that as a backdrop. I'm not going to bore you with that today unless I have a lot of questions on it. The reason why I'm not going to go too far into it is, again, we're working at a pre-design level of accuracy here. Obviously, this isn't surveyor level accuracy. I have topography probably within a foot, realistically probably within 10 feet accuracy, but this certainly isn't something that I would trust to build to, right? So typically from here, if I have this geometry in Revit, what I would like to be able to do is go Topo Surface from an import instance, select this, and have it convert. However, this process does not like to use DXFs at all to do this. So I've got one additional step that I have to go through, which is, I just call it a technological hoop, okay? So I'm going to go File, Export, and export this as a DWG file. So I'm just going to overwrite the one that I did in preparation for this. So I'm just overwriting my DXF file, and then I am going to go back to Insert, Import CAD, and then I am going to import the DWG version. So exact same geometry. In fact, now that it's imported, you can't even tell the difference between the two, other than using the tab button and switching to select the DXF. And I'm going to delete the DXF, so I'm left with the DWG, right? And the easy way that I could tell the difference is hovering over. I can see that this is the DWG, or selected. That one's still pinned. The other one was unpinned. So exact same geometry, but it's in a format that Revit likes. One thing to note, I do have these sort of squirrely little elevation tags that are in here. And when I convert this to topography, it's going to grab everything. So it's even going to try and turn those into a point on my topography as well, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go Massing and Site, Topo Surface, select an import instance, and then I'm just going to use everything. I suppose I'm going to try, I didn't do this in preparation, so hopefully this doesn't blow up on me. I'm going to try and turn those off so it doesn't grab the floor elevation tags, and just say OK. And essentially what that does, I think it did miss them, good. That places an elevation point at every vertex on that 3D geometry, right? So I think some of you, if you've had me the last couple of years at HSA, you've had me walk through a similar process through SketchUp or something like that. It's really a similar mode of work. So yeah, let's save this just in case something goes terribly wrong. All right, so the next step for me is I need to go ahead and delete that DWG file in the background. So unpin and delete it. And again, Eureka Springs, right? So ridiculous amount of elevation change. So I'm actually going to go into my increments on my topography lines and set this to 10 feet. So it's a little bit easier to read. So I have that created. Pretty simple process to go through after you've done this a couple of times. It happens in about 2 minutes. The next thing that I need to do, I'm going to go to level 1, and I am going to go ahead and place a building pad in. So I'm going to unhide my topography file here so that I can see it in my floor plan view. And let's just go ahead and do a building pad. And I'm just going to put it as a rectangle. And again, this looks a little bit like I'm doing this in an arbitrary way, but this is one of those. I've worked with this project a couple of times, and I know the site is right about in the middle of my XYZ on the Cartesian coordinate system in Revit. So it's right here at these sort of home coordinates. So, and again, I'm not working through a high level of precision for this demo. I'm just trying to get things put together so everybody can see what's happening. So I've got a 30-foot by 80-foot box in Revit. And I believe what this is going to do is create a monstrous hole in the site. So one of the first things I need to do before sending this over, or really if I was going to work with this further in Revit, is level out the topography so that my level 1 is at 0, 0, 0. So fastest way to do that is to cut a section right through my building site. And let's figure out how far below ground we are. So I'm just going to run a quick measurement. It is 191 feet approximately. So I'm just going to grab my entire site and move it up 191 feet. Just did that exactly the wrong way. I'm going to grab my site and move it down 191 feet. I love doing things live. So much fun. Cool. That's what I wanted. So if you notice, it does bring the building pad down with it. Easy way to get that back where I want it is simply select it. And if you notice in the building pad properties, it moved that down 191 feet. I'm just going to reset that to 0. And now if I go back and look at this in 3D, I actually have a little bit of a raised building pad here ready to go. Okay, so again, quick topography changes to make as well on this. Really simple to do. I'm just going to go to Edit Surface, and I'm going to grab all of these points right here around my building, and I'm going to set those to 0. And then I'm going to bring them all in a little bit closer. So I'm not wildly destructive to the hill. Again, if you've been to Thorn Crown, you know it does flatten out a little bit right in front of the building and around each edge, but it's not something that is drastic. So I've got a little bit of a flattened site. And then I'm going to raise the building pad up 6 inches, just so we're slightly above. Cool. So last thing I want to do, and this is more to address the question of materiality in Twinmotion, is I'm going to add in just a few simple boxes. So I'm going to just use the Model in Place Components tool. And I am going to create just a few boxes here that we can take a look at right adjacent to the site. Let's make that about a 6-foot tall box. And let's make a couple of those. So I have something like this that is really, this is ready to send to Twinmotion. And we'll start taking a look at it. So I know in particular, these boxes that I made right now, if I edit them and look, its material right now is just set to the default by category. And what I want to do is take a look at editing those materials and applying different materials to each one inside of Twinmotion in the process that I typically teach, which is not using the live linking system underneath the add-ins, not using the Revit plugin to link them, but to use this Fbx exporting system, which again, the only reason why I've been doing that is we found it to be a little bit more stable on the entry-level laptops that most of our students are using. Once you've been using these for a while, I would definitely encourage you to look at the live linking system. You know, we're working with everything from a $500 laptop to a student that might bring in a $3,500 laptop. And this is the most stable process that we've seen, really, in terms of working with the softwares. So all that said, I am ready to export this. I need to make sure I'm in a 3D view. and I'm going to run File, Export, and I'm going to export an Fbx file. So I'm just going to overwrite my thorn crown site. Actually, just go ahead and put it as thorn crown site 2.fbx. And then I'm going to switch over to Twinmotion. Okay, so if I can get some verification that we have Twinmotion up on everybody's screen, that would be excellent.
Yep.
Perfect. Thanks, you guys. Okay, so again, first thing that we want to do in terms of starting to match sites is that's not thorn crown, right? So at least want to get a background that maybe is a little bit more similar. So that you're going to find that under settings, and then location, and then background. And I'm going to change the city to just countryside. Works really well for this particular one. There are some houses and some things like that in the background, but for the most part, as I bring things in, that's going to be sort of occluded from the vision. The rolling hills and things seem to match the Eureka Springs area really nicely. Next, I am ready to import my overall topography. And a really nice thing to note, let me go ahead and throw this on my other screen here, so right now the topography is happening both above and below this sort of default ground plane. So I can simply select that, or I can go into my scene right here, select that, and I can either hide it temporarily, or I can simply delete it. So for right now, since I know it's something I probably don't want to use, I'm just going to delete it. And let's zoom out, and out. Okay. You know, one of the things I should have scheduled to cover here, but really didn't think of it, is setting true north. I will figure that one out. It's in here. I've done it before. I just don't want to do it live because I don't remember the exact method. So we will get to that soon, though. Okay. Just remind me for another one of these tech talks in terms of setting true north. So what I want to do next is start adding some base materials. So underneath my materials and ground plane, nature, I'm just going to start with this sort of grassy ground. And if you notice from a massive distance away, it looks kind of weird. There is a default override to these materials to break them up so you don't see a lot of tiling. Tiling is where you see the texture mapping repeating over and over and over again. It's one of those things that pushes our work into the uncanny valley. If I zoom in, looks much better, right? So don't worry a lot about how it looks from these major distances. And also, if you're seeing a lot of this sort of green, know that you've got a lot of work left to do in terms of getting the site prepped, right? So the next thing that I'm going to do is add in some more context. So I've got a couple of options in the 2020 version of Twinmotion. The first one that's really cool, that's new, is called Vegetation Scatter. And I'm only going to work with this a little bit because this site is big enough that it's something that I don't necessarily want to do for this project. But how Vegetation Scatter works is any geometry that you have that's a common material, like this site topography, I can set up several objects and just say scatter add and start clicking, and it's going to add them, which is really cool. And the more I click add, the more it's going to do. However, a site this large is creating a lot of additional geometry in my scene. That in this case, I really don't, it's too much for this case. So if it was a smaller site, not quite as much topography, definitely would be a feature that I would be using. But in this case, it's not something that I want to work with. In this case, I'm simply going to go to my Vegetation Paint tool. And I'm going to be adding a few trees so I can paint them all at the same time. I believe there's a good oak tree down here someplace. And let's add a conifer in because they're cool. The Colorado spruce. So again, I can add these trees. I can simply drag and drop a tree, and I can add them one at a time if I have a specific tree in a specific location. Or I can use this Vegetation Paint tool, which is again under Context, Vegetation Paint. And when I activate the Paint tool, everything that I have in this group is going to be ready to paint. I can set my diameter. And on each individual tree, I can set its density. So if I want more spruce trees or fewer spruce trees, I can vary that for each one. But essentially, you come in and you just begin painting the basics of where you want these things to go, right? Now, the really cool thing that I didn't really even know this was going to happen until I was playing around with this last week is like, let's say for some reason I wanted to add orange trees. I can just drag and drop an orange tree into this, and it gives me more orange trees. Or I can take that and delete it from the library, and it will remove them. So it sort of remembers the location that I've painted, and I can add in or take away trees as I work through it. And all of those are going to show up in this Vegetation 1 grouping right here, okay? So as soon as I'm ready to do another one of these, and it's just my personal preference, I kind of like to keep my grass and the trees separated because, again, I might not do grass everywhere on the entire site or stretch it as far as the trees, because as I get into this site and start looking around, I want to see how much of this ground I want to start covering. Like looking down the hill, obviously I don't need to put all of the geometry for all of that grass coming down the hill. I'm not going to be able to see it. So I'm really just going to work closer to what I can see and add in more detail in those locations. So as soon as I've deactivated my Vegetation Paint, I can start a brand new one. So I'm just going to go back to Context, Vegetation Paint. This time, rather than trees, we're going to scatter some grass, some foresty looking grass. So I'm going to come down and let's do like this tall grass. Let's add in some wild looking grass. And because I like, little pops of color, I'm going to add in some poppies as well. So I'm going to put the density way down on the poppies, so there's only a few of them, a little bit further up on the wild stuff, and somewhere right around here for the dry stuff. Okay, so again, using sort of the broad brush stroke, I'm going to go ahead and activate Paint. I'm going to decrease the diameter a little bit so I have some more control, and I'm just going to paint right around here and right across this area. And then as I get in closer, I can decrease the diameter of my brush so I can work closer to my building geometry. And I can decrease it even more so I can work in and out between these additional objects. So as soon as I deselect that, you can start to see how that's going to look. Sort of building this up. I can also, again, look sort of up the hill and see where things need additional coverage. So I can activate that again, activate the Paint tool, larger brush, and I can simply start covering those areas that might need a little bit of extra attention. Cool, so let's go ahead and, I got a little too carried away there. Let's activate that one more time. If, again, I get too much, like on the building platform here, I can erase as easily as I can paint. So just get rid of those sort of extra little bits right there. Now I'm also ready to go ahead and import in the thorn crown geometry here. I think that was on my desktop, actually. Let's not do that. Thorn crown chapel, open, okay. So this is an interesting little thing that happens right here. Anytime that I have materials that have come in from Revit, I'll get this warning material if I have two different models that have the same material assigned to them. And typically what we found is we always want to click keep both, because if I've got two different models with the same material assigned, often I want those two different materials to have two different materials in Twinmotion. So I essentially want to keep unique copies of both of those materials. So in this case, I think they're just named like generic 1 or generic 2, something like that. And this is going to allow me to keep unique materials in Twinmotion on both files. So from here, I'm just going to drag the chapel sort of onto its site, move it up just a bit. I see a tree that needs editing, but we'll probably not worry about that right now. And just for sake of making sure that we can have some decent legibility on this, let's go ahead and at least get our glass in place. And that will be good enough to work with right now. And then as mentioned, I want to get something working with these 3 different boxes so we can look at materials. Let's go ahead and let's just sort of drop a concrete material on these, just a poured in place concrete. And you're going to see that that's going to create the same material, the same poured in place concrete material on all 3 of those boxes. Cool, so we've got a site coming together. We have basic entourage across the site. We're starting to get materials, and all of this is happening in like the last 15 minutes. So that's one of the things that I'm kind of the most excited about. But I have this problem. I've got these 3 different boxes, and each one needs a different material. So knowing that, it's a really good time to do a file save. So just write this back into my TechTalks folder. And then let's go back into Revit. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave this box as is, and I'm going to edit. So I've opened up my custom component editor on this, and I'm going to give this a different material. So I'm just clicking on the material category. Inside of Revit, I'm going to go create new material, rename this one to brick. And I'm not going to assign a brick to it inside of Revit. I'm just going to set it to a brick-ish color. And I'm going to match its render appearance there, so that if I look at these as shaded, I can sort of verify that I am changing the materials. And then let's take this little dude here, and I'm going to do edit in place. And let's go ahead and make this one, again, another new material, rename, and let's just do this one as wood. Appearance, nice dark woodsy brown, so that I have those now as 3 different materials. Okay, so that's the default, labeled as brick, labeled as wood. So all that I need to do to update this in Twinmotion is simply do a file, export, Fbx, and I'm going to overwrite my previous Fbx file. Okay, so T-Crown Site 2, save. It's going to ask, do I want to overwrite it? And I'm going to say yes. And then inside of Twinmotion, when I look at my imports, there's my Thorn Crown Site 2. I should be able to hit this refresh, and it is going to update everything. So I haven't lost materials on anything. except it's updated and said, okay, these are no longer this same material, right? So now I can come back in and say, okay, this dude right here is going to get brick. Let's find one of the cooler looking bricks inside of the software. Let's drop this rough brick onto this one. Scale it up a bit. And let's apply this nice chestnut wood. I'll navigate that around so it's in the sunlight so you can see the difference. So super easy to update and work through those. Okay, so the last thing that I wanted to cover today in terms of building site and building entourage, in terms of natural elements, is Quixel. So let me pull over another website really quickly. So Quixel does these things with scanning and photography that are pretty amazing. So I'm just going to click Browse Megascans. I'm not going to download anything. I've already done that. But this is, they have this amazing library of texture maps and objects, trees, all kinds of stuff that you can start to load in. And I just wanted to walk through the process of tapping into this incredible bit of entourage that's all online. That's part of the Epic Games system here. Okay, so I've already downloaded this. Let's see if I can navigate to it really quickly. I think it was a stump, actually. Yeah, this tree stump. I'm kind of fascinated by it. It's really beautiful. So I've already downloaded that, and I'm just going to do an add-in really quick and show you how these things start to stack up in terms of texture maps, because texture mapping in a real-time engine is quite a bit different. So again, I'm starting with the import process, and I'm going to click Open. Should be in my Tech Talks folder, and I've got this stump. Now you're going to see Lodo at the end of these Quixels, and that's level of detail. So it's actually level of detail 0, which, if I recall correctly, and Tom, here in just a minute, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think level of detail 0 is the lowest level of detail. So it's not the hero object. It's not something that if the camera is an inch away from, I want to use, but as a background asset for architecture. These lower level of details are smaller objects, and I'm not going to take as much of a memory hit in terms of how this is going to work. Okay,
so
I'm
David,
just
unfortunately, that's not correct. LOD0 is the highest resolution, and as the number goes up, the resolution is reduced.
So I have it exactly opposite. Thank you, Tom, for jumping in now. I appreciate that. So LOD0, because I'm kind of surprised by that, because the level, so just to give you an idea, the level, this was about, this file was only a couple of megabytes in size, which is why I was thinking it was the, I usually just grab level of detail 0. So I guess I'm always grabbing the highest resolution file, but they're fairly small. I mean, this is only a couple of megs in size for the entire package, both the geometry and the texture maps. So yeah, I would say, use the goodies, right? Use the best ones, because I really haven't seen a noticeable hit in it. Yeah.
I was just saying that's good news.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, it's just kind of like, I'm kind of surprised. I've just always gone with Lodo, what I like to call Lodo, right out of the bat. But yeah, I mean, they've been working great, and I've been throwing 40 or 50 of these into a lot of my scenes without really having a hit. So in terms of performance, so it works great. So I'm just going to import those in.
These days, high polygon count isn't so much a concern anymore. Graphics cards can pump a lot of triangles around. It's really more number of individual objects that tends to slow things down, but we've done some stuff on the rendering backend called automatic batching. So if you have any two objects that are the same model, say your trees or your plants or anything else or you put 20 of those stumps in, Unreal and Twinmotion by extension will automatically render those as a single object. So even that limitation has been significantly eased in the last few versions.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why, as much as I have loved 3ds Max in the past, in 3ds Max, if we tried to render out all of this grass, it would just be a nightmare. It just wouldn't work. But in these real-time engines, all of a sudden we're able to do all of this grass and all of this motion and have it all happen in real time. So, pretty incredible tech that's happening with this stuff. Okay, so I imported the stump. I know by practice that the stump is located somewhere around here, but my students often run into this problem where they have something loaded and they're like, it didn't load. I don't, it's gone. Well, the trick in a system is it's going to load it in usually based off of where it was modeled, and it's going to put its widget, what I can move it around by. Essentially, I will show you specifically what the widget is here in just a second. It's going to line it up at 0, 0, 0 on the Cartesian coordinate axis system. That's one of the reasons why it was important to zero out the site in Revit and keep this building pad as close to 0, 0, 0 in Revit as I could. Things are going to come in where you expect them, not miles away. Okay, my students are great at that. They'll model something literally a mile off the center point in Revit and wonder why it's showing up all over the place in Twin. Okay, so keeping those things at 0 is really helpful. When you can't find something though, the shortcut key, if I select stump and then hit the F key, I always try and tell my students F stands for focus. So I'm going to focus in on that object. So again, just selecting any specific object and hitting F is going to zoom in on that object as a whole. So stump, F, focus. This is my widget, again, for that object. And Twinmotion might have a specific name for what the widget is called. I just, old school, I call them widgets. But I'm just going to move this out.
I call them gizmos.
Gizmos, yeah, widgets and gizmos. So if you'll notice, this did not come in with the texture mapping on it. Let's just sort of move this over right here between my boxes so I can see it really well. Move it over here into the daylight. And I'm going to position it just outside of the grass so we can see it a little bit better. And drop it just into the ground plane. So I need to add the texture maps to the surface. So when I download something off of Quixel, it's all coming in. It's downloading the object geometry, which is basically this. They've used a 3D scanner to scan this. So you're getting all this sort of ridiculous detail around the object. So to add maps to it, I'm going to use my material picker. I'm going to select my objects. The first thing I need to overwrite is the default color. I'm just going to go to, not that, I need to go to more. And I'm going to overwrite the color with the texture map. So where it says empty, I'm simply going to click on that and click on open. And it's already navigated to the folder because the last time I worked on this was this. So I just have, that is the texture map that was downloaded in my zip file from Quixel. So that already is giving me a little bit of detail, a little bit of additional detail. The next thing that I need to do is I need to go back to my material. I'm going to go to settings and I'm going to load in the bump map for it as well. And we can get a little bit further into bump maps later, but bump maps are different from the system that Revit or 3ds Max uses. And again, it's definitely one of those discussions for a later time. Essentially, a real-time engine is going to use a different system. It's not a standard-looking bump map that you would use in Revit or Max. you're going to see these sort of tones of blue, and those are going to define how light interacts with that object. So I'm just going to say okay to that. Let's turn around to the side that the sun is on so you can sort of see a little bit better what's going to happen with this. So if I go back a step to settings and I turn that bump map all the way up, I'm going to guess that the resolution over zoom has a little less of an impact. But what this starts to do is this is deflecting light. So areas like this right here, which previously looked flat, really actually it looks like it's adding additional geometry by the way light is interacting with that object. So starting to throw those types of things on and around the site just sort of add to that level of randomness and nature, especially on a site like this, that sort of take it next level that you don't see in typical visualization, which is a lot of where this stuff is going in terms of building these sort of larger, more immersive, interactive worlds that we're going to be able to start sharing with clients. So that's sort of where I wanted to get to today. I think next week we're going to dive a little bit further into output and materials. So I'm going to stop the sharing, and I am going to stop the recording as well.